Okay, this video is a demonstration of solving a double radical equation. Double radical equations basically mean that just two radicals in the same equation, and you're solving for the variable that's underneath the radical sign. So let's take a look at this one. In a double radical equation, obviously again you have two radicals. You always want to try to isolate one of them. That's always the first step. So let me just write that off to the side here. So isolate one radical, and I'll show you why here in a second. But let's do that. Now if I wanted to isolate one, I'm going to choose to isolate this one and just add this radical to the other side. So let's start writing that out. I get x plus 19, radical x plus 19 rather, is equal to 3 plus radical x minus 20. Okay, now the reason I wanted to isolate a radical because it's going to make it easier for me to get rid of this radical by squaring both sides. So when I square this side, the radical will disappear, because when you square the square root of something, the radicals cancel out. The radical cancels out. So let me write this out so that you can see what I'm doing. And that's a square. And as I mentioned, squaring a square root makes the radical sign disappear. Now you have to be careful here, and this is where people make the majority of their mistakes. They think that by squaring this, you can square the 3 and you can square this and come up with 9 plus x minus 20. And you can't do that, because what you're squaring here is the whole binomial in a sense. This is a binomial because it's 3 plus something. So what you're doing is you're foiling. Okay, make sure that you understand that concept and do it correctly. Too many people, like I said, square the individual parts, and you can't do that. Looks a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. Let's go ahead and FOIL this and go through the steps. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times radical x minus 20 is plus 3 times radical x minus 20. Just 3 of them. When you do the inside parts, it's 3 times, again, radical x minus 20. And then finally, when you multiply radical x minus 20 times radical x minus 20, it's like squaring it again, and you get plus x minus 20. You just basically make it disappear. That looks kind of complicated, but again, it's not too bad if you just take it apart slowly. So in my next step, we'll call it step 6, x plus 19 comes down. I'm just going to gather my like terms here. I'm going to get 9 minus 20 is a negative 11. I'm going to have a plus x. I'm going to have 3 of these plus 3 of these, and you have a total of 6 of those, if that makes sense. X minus 20. Okay, we're getting closer and closer. Now look what I've done. I've gone from double radicals to single radicals. And if you remember the single radical example, you do the exact same thing. You isolate the one radical. Okay, so what we're going to do down here is isolate this and move everything else over to this side. So let's try that, because then we can actually square things again, etc., etc. So if I'm going to add 11 to this side, that's going to give me 30. I'm going to subtract x from both sides, so those will just go away. So I get 30 is equal to 6 radical x minus 20. Now again, if I wanted to isolate the radical, I'm just going to divide both sides by 6, and that goes into there nice and evenly. So that's my step 8. 30 divided by 6 will be equal to 6 radical x minus 20 over 6. That goes away, and I get 5 is equal to the square root of x minus 20. Okay, we're getting closer and closer to our answer here. Just like we did up in step 2, we're going to square both sides. So if I square 5 and square radical x minus 20, I'm going to get 25 is equal to x minus 20. Almost finished. Let's add 20 to both sides, and I get 45 is equal to x. If I were to plug that back in, I would get my correct answer. So let's try that real quickly. 25 plus 19, 45 rather, excuse me, plus 19 is 64. The square root of 64 is 8. So let me write that up there. Minus 45 minus 20 is 25. The square root of 25 is 5. 8 minus 5 is equal to 3. And there's my answer. So the answer is x is equal to 45. Okay, good luck with these. They're really not so bad, like I mentioned. Basically what you're doing is isolating the radical, squaring the sides, getting down to one radical. Isolating the radical, squaring both sides, and getting down to your x. It's like a double loop is what I like to call it. Okay, good luck with these.